After burying his beloved wife, Nicholas Dressen expected to go home with his children. Instead, they handed him taxi fare and abandoned him at the cemetery. Hours later, his face appeared on the evening news as the man blamed for a decades-old tragedy. But someone had carefully fabricated the evidence, and exposing the truth would uncover a conspiracy far bigger than anyone imagined. If you enjoy emotional stories packed with shocking twists and satisfying endings, subscribe now and let's begin. The day I buried my wife, my own children refused to drive me home. Instead, they pressed a folded $50 bill into my hand, told me to take a taxi, climbed into their cars, and left me standing beside my wife's fresh grave without looking back. I never imagined that before the sun rose again, my face would appear on every major evening news broadcast in the country. My name is Nicholas Dressen, and until that day, I believed I understood what loneliness felt like. I was wrong. Loneliness is not the silence inside an empty house. It is watching the people you raise decide that you no longer belong beside them. 3 days before the funeral, my wife, Eleanor, died from a sudden brain aneurysm. There had been no warning signs, no long illness, no final conversation. One ordinary afternoon she was preparing tea, and less than an hour later she was gone. 40 years of marriage ended in a hospital room filled with machines that had already fallen silent. Since then, every minute had blurred together. Funeral arrangements, legal paperwork, sympathy cards, phone calls from relatives I had not spoken to in years. It all happened around me while I moved through each task almost automatically. I barely slept. I barely ate. I simply kept moving because stopping meant accepting that Eleanor would never walk through our front door again. The cemetery sat on a gentle hillside outside Brighton. Gray clouds covered the sky from early morning, and a cold breeze swept across the rows of polished headstones. Friends, neighbors, former co-workers, and distant relatives gathered quietly around Eleanor's coffin. Some cried openly. Others stood with their hands folded, speaking in soft voices that disappeared into the wind. I barely heard any of it. My attention remained fixed on the polished wooden casket as it slowly disappeared into the ground. I kept remembering the ordinary moments instead of the extraordinary ones. Eleanor laughing while burning pancakes. Eleanor reminding me where I had left my reading glasses. Eleanor humming while watering flowers in the garden every Saturday morning. Those memories hurt far more than the funeral itself. When the minister finished speaking, people approached one by one to offer condolences. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Nicholas. She was a wonderful woman. If you ever need anything..." I thanked every person politely, although most of their words blended together. Grief has a strange way of making even familiar voices sound distant. Eventually, the crowd became smaller. Only my children remained nearby. My son Gavin stood with both hands inside the pockets of his black coat. He kept glancing toward the parking area instead of looking at me. My daughter Morel stayed beside him with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Neither of them had spoken more than a few sentences to me all day. I assumed they were grieving in their own way. I never imagined something else was weighing on their minds. Gavin cleared his throat. "Dad." His voice sounded unusually stiff. "We're heading over to Aunt Denise's house." I nodded slowly. "All right, I'll follow you there." For a brief second, neither of them answered. Then Morel looked down at the ground. "I don't think that's a good idea." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Gavin reached into his wallet and removed a folded bill before placing it into my hand. "You should just take a taxi." I stared at the money without understanding. "I don't have my car because you both asked me to ride with you this morning." "I know." His answer came almost immediately. "So, why would I take a taxi?" He avoided my eyes. "We just need some family time." The words echoed inside my head. Family time. As if I were somehow outside my own family. I searched both of their faces, waiting for someone to explain, to smile awkwardly, to admit this was simply poor wording caused by exhaustion. Neither of them did. Instead, Gavin stepped backward. "We'll call you later." Then they turned around together and walked toward their cars without another word. I remained frozen beside Eleanor's grave as engines started one after another. Within less than a minute, every vehicle had disappeared beyond the cemetery gates. Only the wind remained. Only the fresh flowers. Only the silence. I looked down at the $50 bill still resting in my hand and realized I had never felt more unwanted in my entire life. I stayed where I was long after the last car disappeared through the cemetery gates. The cold breeze moved across the hillside, rustling the ribbons tied around funeral wreaths. Fresh soil covered Eleanor's grave, darker than the surrounding grass. A few white lilies rested on top of it, exactly the kind she used to plant along the fence behind our house every spring. I wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe Gavin had spoken carelessly. Maybe Morel was overwhelmed by grief. Maybe they intended to call me 5 minutes later and apologize. My phone remained silent. I looked down at the folded $50 bill still resting in my palm. It suddenly felt heavier than paper should. It wasn't generosity. It was a dismissal. They hadn't simply told me to find my own way home. They had decided I didn't belong with the rest of the family after burying the woman who had held all of us together for 4 decades. I slipped the money into my coat pocket and slowly walked toward the cemetery entrance. The parking lot was almost empty now. Workers had already begun collecting folding chairs from beneath the small canopy where guests had gathered earlier. A groundskeeper offered me a sympathetic nod as he loaded gardening equipment into a utility cart. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir." "Thank you." He hesitated before speaking again. "Would you like me to call someone?" I forced a tired smile.
No.
"I'll manage." The truth was, I wasn't sure I would. Outside the cemetery gates, the road stretched quietly beneath an overcast afternoon sky. Cars passed every few minutes, but none slowed down. I stood beside the sidewalk for nearly 15 minutes before an older silver taxi finally approached. The driver lowered his window. "Need a ride?" "Yes." He climbed out to place my small overnight bag inside the trunk. His movements were unhurried, practiced, and respectful. He looked to be somewhere in his late 60s with neatly combed gray hair and kind eyes that immediately reminded me of a favorite teacher from childhood. "My name's Walter," he said as I settled into the back seat. "Nicholas. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." I blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" He pointed toward the cemetery through the windshield. "I've been driving people from there for nearly 20 years. I nodded quietly. "Then you've probably seen every kind of grief." Walter sighed. "More than anyone should." The taxi pulled away from the cemetery and merged onto the main road leading toward Brighton. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. I rested my forehead lightly against the cool window, watching fields, stone fences, and distant farmhouses slide past. Eventually, Walter broke the silence. "Your wife. 40 years. He let out a slow breath. "My Margaret passed away 11 years ago." "I'm sorry. You never really stopped missing them." His voice carried no bitterness, only quiet certainty. I understood exactly what he meant. For the first time all day, I didn't feel like someone was offering rehearsed sympathy. Walter wasn't trying to make me feel better. He was simply telling me the truth. As we approached a traffic light, my phone vibrated. One message. It was from Gavin. I opened it immediately. Hope lasted less than 3 seconds. The message contained only 6 words. "Please don't come to Aunt Denise's." Nothing else. No explanation. No apology. I stared at the screen while my chest tightened. Walter noticed my expression in the rearview mirror. "Bad news. My son just asked me not to join the family." Walter remained silent for a moment before speaking carefully. "Sometimes grief makes people behave strangely. I hope that's all it is." Deep inside, however, something felt wrong. Not angry, not confused.
Wrong.
As though there were pieces of a conversation I had never been allowed to hear. Walter reached toward the dashboard and turned on the radio, hoping a little music might ease the silence filling the car. Soft piano played for only a few seconds. Then it abruptly stopped. A sharp emergency tone interrupted the broadcast. "This is a national news bulletin. We interrupt regular programming with breaking developments concerning a reopened criminal investigation connected to the Halcyon Bridge disaster." Neither of us paid much attention at first. That bridge had collapsed more than 20 years ago. It was old history. Then the announcer spoke the next sentence. Authorities are seeking former structural engineer Nicholas Dressen for questioning following newly surfaced evidence. Walter's hands tightened around the steering wheel. Every drop of blood seemed to leave my face. For several seconds, neither Walter nor I said a single word. The only sound inside the taxi came from the radio as the news anchor continued reading details that made less sense with every sentence. I kept waiting to hear another Nicholas Dressen mentioned, someone who had worked on the Halcyon Bridge project years ago. But the description matched my career perfectly. Newly uncovered documents allegedly show that former structural engineer Nicholas Dressen approved the use of substandard materials despite repeated internal warnings. My heart pounded against my ribs. "No," I whispered. Walter glanced at me through the rear-view mirror. "You all right?"
"They're talking about me."
He looked genuinely confused. "You worked on that bridge?" "I was part of the engineering review team, yes. But the investigation ended decades ago. Every document was examined. Every engineer was questioned. The government cleared all of us." The announcer continued. Television journalist Verena Holst will present exclusive evidence tonight during a special investigative broadcast. Walter slowly pulled the taxi into the parking lot of a small roadside cafe. "I think we'd better see what's happening." I nodded, still unable to process what I had just heard. Inside the cafe, nearly every customer had turned toward a large television mounted above the counter. Coffee cups rested forgotten on tables while people watched the developing story. The room smelled of fresh bread and roasted coffee, but no one seemed interested in eating anymore. Breaking news flashed across the screen. Then my face appeared. It was an old corporate photograph taken when I was still working as a structural engineer nearly 25 years earlier. I barely recognized the younger man smiling stiffly in a navy suit. Conversations immediately spread across the cafe. "I remember that bridge. They said the case was solved. So they missed the real culprit?" I instinctively lowered my head and pulled my coat collar slightly higher. Thankfully, the photograph was old enough that no one around me made the connection. A confident woman appeared on the television screen, standing in front of a modern newsroom set. "Good afternoon," she began. "I'm Verena Holst, and tonight our investigative team will reveal evidence hidden from the public for more than 2 decades. Her voice was calm, polished, and convincing. She spoke with absolute certainty. Behind her appeared scanned documents, engineering diagrams, and highlighted signatures. One page filled the screen. "There," she said, pointing toward the bottom of the document. "This authorization bears Nicholas Dressen's signature, approving a shipment of lower-grade structural steel just weeks before construction continued." My breathing stopped. I leaned closer to the television. The signature looked exactly like mine, at least at first glance. Walter looked from the screen back to me. "Is that your signature?" "It looks like it, but—" I narrowed my eyes. Something wasn't right. The shape matched. The style matched. Yet a detail immediately caught my attention. 21 years earlier, I had injured my right hand during an industrial inspection accident. Nerve damage permanently changed the way I held a pen. Every official signature after that accident slanted slightly upward because my wrist no longer rotated naturally. The signature on the television slanted downward, exactly the way I had signed documents before my injury. Only someone using very old records would reproduce that version. I quietly shook my head. "I never signed that document." Walter folded his arms. "You're certain?" "I'd swear to it under oath." The broadcast continued, showing dramatic graphics and bold headlines, carefully arranged to convince viewers that a forgotten criminal had finally been exposed. No one questioned the evidence. No one questioned the timing. People simply believed what they were seeing. My phone began vibrating repeatedly inside my coat pocket. One message after another appeared across the screen. Former coworkers, old neighbors, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them asked the same question in different words. "Why didn't you tell us?" Not one message asked whether the accusation was true. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. Walter remained unusually quiet before finally speaking. "If that signature isn't yours, somebody worked very hard to make people believe it is." I looked once more at Verena Holst smiling confidently into the camera. For the first time that day, my grief was replaced by something colder. Someone wasn't reporting a story. Someone was creating one. Walter drove away from the cafe without asking where I wanted to go next. Neither of us believed returning to my empty house was the right decision anymore. If the story spreading across television was only the beginning, I needed to understand who was behind it before the accusations grew even larger. The afternoon sky darkened as light rain began tapping against the windshield. Cars passed in the opposite direction with their headlights already glowing through the mist. I watched them absent-mindedly while my mind replayed the image of that forged signature again and again. "There has to be someone who can prove it's fake," Walter finally said. "I know one person." He looked at me through the mirror. "A lawyer?" I shook my head. "A forensic document examiner." Walter nodded. "Can you trust him?" "With my life." His name was Dr. Farid Nassim, one of the country's leading specialists in handwriting authentication. Years earlier, our engineering firm had hired him during a contract dispute involving forged construction permits. He had exposed the fraud in less than 2 days. I remembered him because he never rushed to conclusions. Evidence mattered more to him than opinions. I searched through my contacts until I found his number. My thumb hesitated above the call button. We hadn't spoken in nearly 9 years. When I finally pressed it, the phone rang only twice. "Nicholas?" His voice sounded older, but immediately recognizable. "It's been a long time." "It certainly has. Is everything all right?"
No.
The single word carried more weight than any explanation. "I need your help." There was a brief silence before he answered. "Tell me where you are." An hour later, Walter parked outside a modest brick office building in central London. Unlike the polished corporate towers surrounding it, Farid's office occupied the second floor of an older building above a family-owned bookstore. A brass plaque beside the entrance simply read, "Nassim Forensic Document Analysis." Inside, shelves overflowed with legal textbooks, microscopes, archival folders, and framed court certifications. Everything looked organized without feeling staged. Farid greeted me with a firm handshake before noticing my black funeral suit. His expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry. My wife passed away 3 days ago." He lowered his head respectfully. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "So do I." I explained everything from the funeral to the breaking news broadcast without leaving out a single detail. Walter occasionally added details I had forgotten, especially the reactions inside the cafe. Farid listened without interrupting. Only after I finished did he ask, "Did you record the broadcast?" Walter smiled slightly. I suspected something wasn't right. He pulled out his phone. I recorded almost all of it. Farid transferred the video onto his computer and enlarged the image containing the disputed document. He zoomed in repeatedly until individual ink patterns became visible despite the television recording's limited quality. For nearly 20 minutes, the room remained completely silent except for the clicking of his mouse. Finally, he leaned back. "Interesting." I felt my pulse quicken. "What is it?" "The signature is convincing." My heart sank. "But it isn't authentic." I looked at him carefully. "You're sure?" He nodded once. "Very." He pointed toward the enlarged image. "Look closely at these pen strokes. Whoever created this signature assembled it digitally from multiple archived samples. Natural handwriting contains continuous pressure changes. This image contains repeated patterns copied from different originals." Walter leaned closer. "So, someone built it like a puzzle?" "Exactly." Farid clicked another file onto the screen. "There's something even stranger." He opened a comparison between the television document and a genuine engineering authorization form from the same era. The paper template shown on television didn't exist during the Halcyon Bridge project. I frowned. "What do you mean?" This version of the authorization form was introduced 6 years later after construction regulations changed nationwide. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Whoever had fabricated the evidence knew enough to imitate my signature, but not enough to recreate the correct paperwork. Farid folded his hands. "Nicholas, this wasn't an old document that surfaced by accident." "What are you saying?" I'm saying someone manufactured evidence specifically for public release. Before I could answer, Farid's computer emitted a sharp notification sound. A new email had just arrived. He opened it. The message contained only one sentence. Stop helping Nicholas Dressen if you value your own reputation. No signature. No sender's name. No explanation. Farid stared at the screen for several long seconds before quietly closing the message. Then he looked directly at me. This is much bigger than a forged signature. Farid closed the anonymous email without replying. He did not panic, curse, or even raise his voice. Instead, he calmly disconnected his office computer from the internet, reached for a small external drive, and copied every file related to my case onto it. Walter watched him with curiosity. You've done this before, haven't you? Farid gave a faint smile. When someone threatens an expert instead of challenging the evidence, it usually means they're afraid the evidence will survive scrutiny. His words settled heavily over the room. I had arrived hoping someone would simply tell me the signature was fake. Instead, we were uncovering something that appeared carefully planned. Whoever was behind this had expected people like Farid to stay quiet. Unfortunately for them, they had chosen the wrong man to intimidate. Farid handed me the external drive. Keep this with you. Don't leave it in your house or your car. You think someone might try to take it? I think someone already knows we're asking the right questions. Walter crossed his arms. So, what do we do now? Farid walked toward a tall filing cabinet and unlocked the bottom drawer with a small brass key. Inside were dozens of archived case files organized by year. I'm looking for something, he said. What kind of something? I asked. A pattern. He pulled out 3 thick folders and placed them across the desk. These are your cases. They're unrelated forgery investigations from the last 8 years. Walter frowned. How does that help Nicholas? Farid opened the first folder. In every forgery, the document itself tells only half the story. He pointed toward a series of printed emails. The other half is always who benefits from people believing it. The sentence stayed with me. Who benefited from turning me into a national villain? Certainly not the families affected by the bridge collapse. The official investigation had compensated them years ago. The engineering company no longer existed. Most of the executives had either retired or passed away. So, why reopen the case now? Farid reached for a legal pad and began writing names in neat block letters. Let's remove impossible motives first. He wrote government. No. He crossed it out. Former employer. No financial reason. Another line through the name. Victims' families. He paused. Possible emotionally, but creating forged evidence would expose them to criminal charges. Another line. Only one blank space remained. Media. Farid tapped the pen against the paper. The timing bothers me. Walter leaned closer. Because of the television special? Exactly. He looked directly at me. Your wife's funeral happened today. I nodded slowly. The investigative broadcast was announced this afternoon, which means the story was scheduled before anyone knew your emotional state. I frowned. I don't understand. If someone wanted maximum public impact, Farid explained, they would release the accusations when you were least capable of defending yourself. The realization made my stomach tighten. I hadn't been chosen randomly. Someone had waited until the worst week of my life. Walter suddenly snapped his fingers. The reporter. Farid looked up. Verena Holst. Walter nodded. She didn't simply report that documents existed. She announced an exclusive investigation. That means she either obtained the documents herself or worked directly with whoever created them. Farid slowly turned toward his computer again. I'd like to know more about her. Within minutes, he searched public records, previous interviews, industry awards, and archived broadcasts. Verena's career looked nearly flawless. She had won journalism prizes, hosted several high-profile investigations, and built a reputation for exposing corruption in both government and private industry. On paper, she appeared untouchable. Then Farid stopped scrolling. That's interesting. What? I asked. He enlarged an article published almost 12 years earlier. It described a veteran television editor who had resigned from Verina's production team after what the article called creative disagreements. No further explanation had ever been published. Farid wrote down the editor's name, Leon Mercer. If anyone knows how her investigations are produced, he said, it's probably him. Walter looked hopeful for the first time all evening. So we find Mercer. Farid nodded. If he's willing to talk. As we prepared to leave the office, my phone rang again. The caller ID displayed my daughter Morel's name. For one brief moment, I thought she might finally explain why they had abandoned me at the cemetery. I answered immediately. Instead of an apology, her frightened voice whispered only one sentence. Dad, whatever you do, don't let anyone know where you are. The line went dead before I could answer. I called Morel back before the screen had even finished fading to black. The call connected for less than 2 seconds before it was rejected. I tried again. This time it went straight to voicemail. I stared at my phone, hoping another message would appear, but nothing came. Walter looked at me from the driver's seat. What did she say? I slipped the phone into my pocket. She told me not to let anyone know where I am. Farid's expression immediately changed. Those aren't the words of someone who believes you're guilty. You think she's afraid? I think she's trying to warn you. None of us spoke for several moments. If my children truly believed the accusations on television, why would Morel suddenly call with a warning? It didn't fit. Something had changed between the cemetery and that phone call. Farid locked his office door before joining us outside. Evening had settled over London, covering the streets with reflections from shop windows and traffic lights. Rain still fell lightly, coating the pavement in a thin layer of water that mirrored passing headlights. I don't want either of you going home tonight, Farid said. Walter nodded immediately. I've got a spare room. I appreciated the offer, but another thought had already taken hold. You mentioned that former television editor, Leon Mercer. Can we find him tonight? Farid checked the time. Probably not, but we may be able to locate him. Back inside Walter's taxi, Farid opened his laptop using a mobile internet connection. Public records revealed that Leon Mercer had left national television nearly a decade earlier. Since then, he had disappeared from the public eye, avoiding interviews and declining requests to comment on his former employer. There was, however, one useful detail. A business registration listed a small video restoration studio in Manchester under his name. Walter smiled. That's only a few hours away. Farid nodded cautiously. If Mercer is willing to talk, he may know whether Verina has done something like this before. Before leaving London, we stopped at a quiet service station to buy coffee and sandwiches. None of us had eaten since morning. The exhaustion finally began catching up with me. My body ached from standing through the funeral, and my mind felt trapped between grief and disbelief. While Walter paid for the coffee, I remained near the entrance, absent-mindedly watching a television mounted above the cashier. Verina Holst had returned. A promotional advertisement announced her exclusive primetime investigation. The headlines stretched across the screen. The engineer who got away with murder? I felt sick. The bridge collapse had been a tragic accident investigated for years. Yet the advertisement transformed it into something deliberate before any court had reviewed the so-called new evidence. Customers nearby watched with fascination. One man shook his head. If that's true, lock him up forever. Another replied, amazing what reporters uncover these days. I quietly turned away before either of them could recognize me. Back in the taxi, Walter handed me a cup of hot coffee. You don't have to watch every report. I know, but if I don't, I won't know what people are being told. He couldn't argue with that. As we merged onto the motorway toward Manchester, Farid received a phone call through the car's speaker system. He answered immediately. Farid speaking. A calm female voice introduced herself. My name is Celia Brooks. Farid sat straighter. I know who you are. I recognized the name as well. Celia Brooks was an independent investigative journalist known for exposing corporate fraud. Unlike television personalities chasing dramatic headlines, she had built her reputation by publishing carefully verified investigations, even when they took months to complete. I've been trying to reach you, Celia continued. Someone anonymously sent me copies of Verena Holst's broadcast material this afternoon. Fard exchanged a quick glance with me. Go on. I also received a message suggesting you were examining the documents. His eyes narrowed. That's correct. There was a brief pause before Celia spoke again. I believe those documents were fabricated. The taxi fell completely silent. She continued before anyone could interrupt. I can't prove it yet, but I've been investigating Verena Holst for nearly a year because several former employees contacted me privately. None of them were willing to speak on record. My pulse quickened. So, why call now? I asked. Because tonight, Celia replied, one of those former employees finally agreed to meet. Fard leaned toward the speaker. Who? There was another short pause. His name is Leon Mercer. Walter looked at me with wide eyes as the motorway stretched endlessly ahead beneath the dark sky. For the first time since leaving the cemetery, it felt as though the truth might actually be waiting for us instead of running away.